Did you know there's only one murder case in American history where a ghost's testimony helped convict a killer? Not a witness who claimed to see a ghost, not someone interpreting signs. An actual ghost, speaking from beyond the grave, whose words were entered into official court records and helped send a man to prison for murder. This isn't fiction. This isn't folklore. This happened in 1897 in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. And every word I'm about to tell you comes from court documents, newspaper reports, and sworn testimonies that still exist today. But before I reveal how a dead woman solved her own murder, before I tell you about the trial that made legal history, I need you to understand something. This story will make you question everything you believe about justice, about death, and about what's possible when a mother's love refuses to let go. If you're ready to hear one of the most chilling true stories in American history, a story that proves sometimes the dead don't rest until justice is served, then keep listening, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after I'm done telling it. Picture this, January 1897. The Greenbrier Valley stretches out like a wrinkled blanket between the Allegheny Mountains. Snow covers everything, the pine trees, the wooden fences, the gravestones in the church cemetery. Smoke rises from chimneys into a gray sky that seems to press down on the earth like a heavy hand. This is coal country, mining country, a place where men disappear into the earth before dawn and come back covered in black dust after dark, where women spend their days scrubbing that same dust from clothes, from floors, from the creases in their husbands' faces. The nearest big city, Charleston, is a 3-day journey by horse. News travels slowly here. Secrets travel even slower. In the tiny community of Richlands, really just a cluster of farms and a general store, everyone knows everyone. They know who drinks too much on Saturday nights. They know whose marriage is struggling. They know which young women are hoping for proposals and which young men are looking for wives. But in October of 1896, a stranger arrived, and everything changed. Erasmus Stribling Trout Shue, yes, that was his real name, rode into Greenbrier County on a black horse, wearing clothes too fine for a working man. He was 35 years old, though he looked younger. Dark hair slicked back with pomade, a mustache waxed to sharp points, eyes that were almost black in certain light. He took a job at the local blacksmith shop, swinging hammers and shaping horseshoes. The work was beneath someone dressed like him, but he didn't complain. He rented a small room above the general store. He attended church every Sunday, sitting in the back pew, singing hymns in a rich baritone voice that made the young women turn their heads. Nobody knew where he came from. When asked, he'd smile, that easy practice smile, and say he was from here and there. He mentioned working in Droop Mountain, maybe Pocahontas County. The stories changed depending on who was listening. What people didn't know, what they wouldn't learn until much later, was that Erasmus Shue had been married twice before. His first wife had left him, claiming abuse. She'd run back to her family with bruises on her arms and fear in her eyes. His second wife had died, suddenly, mysteriously. The death was ruled natural, but neighbors whispered about the bruises they'd seen on her neck at the funeral. But in Greenbrier County, in the fall of 1896, nobody knew any of this. All they knew was that Erasmus Shue was handsome, charming, and very interested in a local girl named Elva Zona Heaster. Let me tell you about Zona, 24 years old, never married, which in 1897 made her practically an old maid. She lived with her mother, Mary Jane Heaster, in a small log cabin about 3 miles from town. Her father, Jacob, had died years earlier, leaving the 2 women to manage the small farm alone. Zona was pretty in a quiet way, dark hair that she wore pinned up during the day and braided at night, brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, hands rough from farm work but gentle when she played with the neighbors' children. She could read and write, not common for women in rural West Virginia then. She loved poetry, especially Byron and Shelley. On Sundays, she taught Sunday school to the little ones, telling them Bible stories with such passion that even the rowdy boys sat still and listened. But here's what matters. Zona was lonely. She watched her friends marry one by one. She helped sew their wedding dresses, attended their ceremonies, held their babies. And every night she went home to the same small cabin, the same narrow bed, the same view of the mountains from her window. She was waiting for something to happen, for someone to happen. And then Erasmus Shue asked her to take a walk after church. Mary Jane Heaster knew something was wrong from the beginning. Call it mother's intuition. Call it a sixth sense. But the moment she met Erasmus Shue, something cold settled in her stomach. It wasn't anything specific at first. He was polite. He brought flowers. He complimented her cooking. But there was something about the way he looked at Zona, like a cat watching a bird, that made Mary Jane's skin crawl. His smile doesn't reach his eyes, she told her sister one evening, whispering over tea. When he thinks no one's looking, his face goes empty, like there's nothing behind it. She tried to warn Zona. "There's something not right about that man," she said one night as they prepared dinner. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, October wind rattled the windows. Zona's cheeks flushed. "You don't know him, Mama." "I know enough. You don't want me to be happy. I want you to be safe." "He loves me." "How do you know?" "He told me so." Mary Jane set down her knife, wiped her hands on her apron, looked her daughter straight in the eye. "Men say lots of things, Zona. It's what they do that matters." But Zona was already lost, already caught in the web of Erasmus Shue's charm. They married on October 20th, 1896, just 3 weeks after they met. The ceremony was small. Quick, Erasmus didn't invite anyone from his past. No family, no friends, just him, Zona, the preacher, and 2 witnesses pulled from the street. Mary Jane didn't attend. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching her daughter walk toward something terrible. The newlyweds moved into a small house near the blacksmith shop. 2 rooms downstairs, a kitchen and parlor. 1 room upstairs where they slept. A wooden staircase connected the floors, each step creaking under weight. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. Zona visited her mother every Sunday after church. She talked about fixing up the house, about the curtains she was sewing, about the garden she planned to plant in spring. She smiled, she laughed, she seemed happy. But Mary Jane noticed things, little things. The way Zona winced when she sat down, the way she kept touching her ribs gently, like something hurt. The high-necked dresses she suddenly started wearing, even though she'd always preferred open collars. "Are you all right?" Mary Jane asked one Sunday in November. "Of course, Mama." "Zona, I'm fine." But her eyes darted away. Her hands trembled as she poured the tea. The neighbors noticed things too. Mrs. Anderson, who lived next door, heard shouting through the walls late at night. Mr. Jones, the shopkeeper, saw Zona buying powder to cover bruises on her arms. The Reverend's wife mentioned that Zona had stopped coming to the Wednesday prayer meetings. But this was 1897. What happened between a husband and wife was private business. Nobody interfered. Nobody asked questions. Not until it was too late. Let me tell you about the last week of Zona's life. These details matter. They're the pieces of a puzzle that wouldn't come together until after she was dead. Monday, January 18th, 1897. Zona visited the general store. Mr. Jones noticed she moved slowly, carefully, like every step hurt. She bought flour, salt, and thread. When he asked after her health, she said she hadn't been sleeping well. Tuesday, January 19th. Mrs. Anderson saw Zona hanging laundry in the bitter cold. She offered to help, but Zona refused. "Erasmus doesn't like people coming around," she said. Wednesday, January 20th. The Reverend's wife stopped by to invite Zona to the prayer meeting. Erasmus answered the door, said Zona was feeling poorly. Wouldn't let her inside. Thursday, January 21st. Dr. Knapp saw Erasmus at the tavern, drinking heavily. He was in a foul mood, complaining about women who didn't know their place, about wives who didn't show proper respect. Friday, January 22nd, Zona's last day alive. That morning, Erasmus left for work early. He seemed agitated, according to the other blacksmiths. Kept making mistakes, burned himself twice on hot metal, left early, saying he wasn't feeling well. That evening, Mrs. Anderson heard voices through the wall. Erasmus shouting, something about dinner, about meat not being cooked right. Then a crash, like furniture falling. Or a body. Then silence. Saturday, January 23rd, 1897, 10 in the morning. Anderson Jones, an 11-year-old boy, knocked on the Shue's door. Now, pay attention to what happens next, because the way this death was discovered and what happened immediately after would become the most important evidence in the trial. Every detail I'm about to tell you was testified to under oath. Anderson Jones didn't want to go to the Shue house that morning. Something felt wrong. The curtains were drawn. No smoke came from the chimney despite the freezing cold. The house looked dead. But Mr. Shue had found him at the store and given him a nickel, a lot of money for a boy in 1897, to go check on Mrs. Shue, to see if she needed anything from town. So Anderson knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. The door swung open. It hadn't been latched. "Mrs. Shue?" His voice echoed in the cold house. "Mrs. Shue, you home?" He stepped inside. The parlor was dark. The fire in the hearth had been out for hours. His breath came out in white puffs. Then he saw her, at the bottom of the stairs, stretched out with her feet together, one hand on her chest, the other by her side. Her head turned slightly to one side. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. Anderson ran. He ran faster than he'd ever run in his life, his boots slipping on the icy road, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He ran straight to his mother, who sent him to fetch Dr. Knapp, while she went to tell Erasmus Shue that his wife was dead. Dr. George W. Knapp was eating breakfast when the boy arrived, gasping and crying about Mrs. Shue being dead. The doctor grabbed his medical bag and headed out into the cold morning. But by the time he arrived at the Shue house, this is important, Erasmus was already there. He'd carried Zona's body upstairs, laid her on the bed, washed her face, changed her clothes into her best Sunday dress, a high-necked affair with a stiff collar, and he'd wrapped a large scarf around her neck, tying it in an elaborate bow. When Dr. Knapp tried to examine the body, Erasmus became hysterical. "Don't touch her," he sobbed, throwing himself across his wife's body. "Please, she's been through enough." The doctor tried to check for signs of violence, but Erasmus wouldn't let him near her head or neck. He cradled Zona's head in his lap, weeping so loudly that Mrs. Anderson could hear him next door. Dr. Knapp was young, inexperienced, and faced with a grieving husband, he did only the most basic examination. He noted that her body was cold. Rigor mortis had set in. There was no blood, no obvious wounds on her arms or torso. He wrote in his report, "Death by everlasting faint." Later, perhaps realizing how strange that sounded, he changed it to childbirth. But Zona wasn't pregnant. Everyone knew that. Still, the doctor signed the death certificate. What else could he do? A man was grieving his wife. These things happened. Women died suddenly all the time in 1897, from weak hearts, from strokes, from a dozen things medicine didn't yet understand. The case was closed, or it should have been. In 1897, when someone died, the body was prepared at home. Family members, usually women, would wash the deceased, dress them in their best clothes, and lay them out in the parlor for viewing. Neighbors would come to pay respects. The local women would bring food. It was a community affair, but Erasmus Shue wouldn't let anyone touch Zona's body. He prepared her himself, alone, behind locked doors. When the neighbor women came to help, he sent them away. "I'll take care of my wife," he said, his voice strange and flat. He dressed her in that high-neck dress with a stiff collar. He added the scarf, bright red, which was odd for mourning. He fixed her hair, arranging it carefully around her face. He even applied rouge to her cheeks and lips, trying to make her look alive. When it was time for the viewing, he placed pillows on either side of her head in the coffin, saying he wanted her to rest comfortably. A large pillow under her head, smaller ones beside each ear. The scarf pulled high, covering her neck completely. During the wake, he never left her side. Mary Jane Heaster came to the funeral, of course. Whatever had happened between her and Erasmus, Zona was still her daughter. She stood by the coffin, looking down at her child's face. Something was wrong. She knew it immediately. The positioning was unnatural. The pillows were strange. And the scarf? Why the scarf? When she reached out to touch her daughter's face, to say goodbye, Erasmus grabbed her wrist. "Don't disturb her," he said. His fingers were cold, his grip too tight. Mary Jane pulled away, but as she did, the scarf shifted slightly, and she saw them. Bruises, dark finger-shaped bruises around Zona's throat. She looked at Erasmus. He was staring at her, his dark eyes flat and empty, like a snake's. He adjusted the scarf, pulling it higher. "She needs her rest," he said. Mary Jane said nothing, but in that moment, she knew. Her daughter had been murdered. The funeral took place on January 24th, 1897, at the Soul Chapel Methodist Church. The small church was packed. Everyone in Richlands came to pay respects to the young woman who'd taught their children Sunday school. But all anyone could talk about afterward was how strange Erasmus Shue behaved. He paced beside the coffin, never standing still. One moment sobbing dramatically, the next laughing and saying Zona was happier now that she'd gone to her reward. He wouldn't let anyone get close to the body. When the pastor tried to adjust the flowers near her head, Erasmus nearly knocked him over, rushing to stop him. He was like a man possessed, Mrs. Williams told her husband later. Kept talking about how Zona would be so happy in heaven, how she'd never have to cook another meal or wash another dish. Strange things to say at your wife's funeral. Mr. Jones, the shopkeeper, noticed something else. He kept checking his watch, like he was waiting for something, like he wanted it to be over. When it came time to close the coffin, Erasmus insisted on doing it himself. He kissed Zona's forehead, a long theatrical kiss that made people uncomfortable. Then he arranged the scarf one more time, making sure it covered every inch of her neck. The coffin was nailed shut. Zona was buried in the Soul Chapel Cemetery on a hill overlooking the valley. And Erasmus Shue thought he'd gotten away with murder. He was wrong. Mary Jane Heaster went home after the funeral to an empty house. The same house where Zona had grown up, where her daughter's clothes still hung in the wardrobe, where her hairbrush still sat on the dresser, dark strands caught in the bristles. She didn't cry at first. She couldn't. The grief was too big, too heavy. It sat in her chest like a stone. But more than grief, she felt rage. She knew Erasmus had killed her daughter. She'd seen the bruises. She'd seen the guilty fear in his eyes. But what could she do? She was just an old woman, a widow. Nobody would listen to her. For 4 weeks, she prayed. Every night she knelt by her bed and prayed. Not for comfort, not for peace. She prayed for justice. She prayed for truth. She prayed for her daughter to somehow, some way, tell the world what had really happened. "Help me, Zona," she whispered into the darkness. "Help me prove what he did to you." It started small. A cold spot in Zona's old room that wouldn't warm up no matter how high Mary Jane built the fire. The sound of footsteps on the stairs when no one was there. Zona's rocking chair moving slightly, as if someone had just gotten up from it. Mary Jane tried to ignore it at first, told herself it was her imagination, grief playing tricks on her mind. But then the smell started. Roses. Zona had loved roses. She'd grown them in the garden, dried the petals for potpourri, wore rose water as perfume. And suddenly, in the middle of February, in a house with no roses, Mary Jane could smell them everywhere. Strong, fresh, like summer roses just picked from the garden. She'd walk into a room and the scent would be overwhelming. Then it would fade, only to appear somewhere else in the house. One night, she followed the scent upstairs. It led her to Zona's room, to her dresser, to the bottom drawer where Zona kept her special things, letters, pressed flowers, a lock of hair from when she was a baby. Mary Jane opened the drawer. Inside was Zona's diary, the one Mary Jane didn't even know existed. She opened it with trembling hands. The last entry was dated January 21st, 1897, the day before Zona died. E was in a terrible mood again. I burned the bread at dinner, and I can't write what he did. My ribs hurt so much I can barely breathe. I'm scared, but I can't leave. He says he'll kill me if I try. I believe him. God help me, I believe him. For 4 nights in late February, Mary Jane was awakened by something in her room. The first night, it was just a feeling, a presence, like someone standing in the corner, watching her. The second night, she saw a light, soft, blue-white, floating near the ceiling. It pulsed gently, like breathing. The third night, the light took shape, a figure, indistinct, but familiar in the way it moved, the way it stood. The fourth night, Zona appeared. Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because this is where our story becomes something more than just another murder case. This is where it becomes the only case in American legal history where a ghost's testimony was used as evidence. February 25th, 1897. 2 in the morning. Mary Jane woke to her room filled with light. Not lamplight, not moonlight. Something else. Something that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air was ice cold. Her breath came out in white clouds. And there, at the foot of her bed, stood Zona. She looked exactly as she had in life, except transparent, like looking through frosted glass. She wore the dress she'd been buried in, but the scarf was gone. Her neck was exposed, showing the dark purple bruises that circled her throat like a necklace of violence. Mary Jane sat up, her heart racing. "Zona?" The ghost nodded. When she spoke, her voice didn't come from her mouth, but seemed to form directly in Mary Jane's mind. "Mama, he killed me." "I know, child, I know, but how? Tell me everything." And Zona did. According to Mary Jane's sworn testimony she would repeat in court, under oath, in front of a judge and jury. This is what Zona's ghost told her. On January 22nd, Erasmus had come home from work angry. He'd been drinking. He wanted supper ready, but Zona had only prepared vegetables. No meat. He flew into a rage. "He grabbed me by the throat," Zona said. "He squeezed and squeezed. I tried to fight him off, but he was too strong. He squeezed until everything went black." To demonstrate, the ghost turned her head completely around, a full 180 degrees, showing her mother the back of her head while her body faced forward. "He broke my neck, Mama, snapped it like a chicken's." Mary Jane was crying now. "Why didn't you leave him? Why didn't you come home?" "I tried. The week before I died, I tried to leave. He caught me at the door, beat me so bad I couldn't walk for 2 days, said if I ever tried to leave again, he'd kill me." And he did, Mama. He did. The ghost began to fade. "Wait," Mary Jane reached out. "How do I prove it? How do I get justice for you?" Zona's voice was growing faint. Tell them to look at my neck. Make them look. Don't let him get away with it." And she was gone. The room was dark again, warm, normal. But Mary Jane knew what she had to do. The next morning, Mary Jane Heaster put on her best dress, pinned her hair severely back, and walked the 5 miles to Lewisburg, the county seat. She marched straight into the office of John Alfred Preston, the prosecutor for Greenbrier County. Preston was a serious man, educated, logical, not the sort to believe in ghosts. But he knew Mary Jane Heaster by reputation, a respectable widow, a church-going woman, not given to flights of fancy. "Mrs. Heaster," he said, standing as she entered, "how can I help you?" "My daughter was murdered." "Mrs. Shue's death was ruled natural." "My daughter was murdered by her husband, and I can prove it." Preston sat back down. "How?" And Mary Jane told him everything, about the bruises she'd seen at the funeral, about Erasmus's strange behavior, about the diary entry, and yes, about the ghost. Preston listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Heaster," he said carefully, "you're asking me to exhume a body based on a dream? Not a dream? A visitation? The court doesn't recognize ghostly visitations as evidence." "Then investigate based on the bruises I saw, based on his behavior, based on the fact that Dr. Knapp never properly examined her body." Preston drummed his fingers on his desk. He'd actually had his own doubts about Zona Shue's death. The changing cause of death on the certificate, the quick burial, the husband's refusal to let anyone near the body. "I'll look into it," he said finally. Mary Jane stood. "My daughter won't rest until there's justice, and neither will I." Prosecutor Preston was a thorough man. Before taking the dramatic step of exhuming a body, he decided to investigate quietly. He started with Dr. Knapp. "Tell me exactly what happened when you examined Mrs. Shue." The young doctor shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I didn't exactly complete a full examination." "Why not?" "Mr. Shue was distraught. He wouldn't let me near her head or neck. He became quite violent when I tried." "Violent?" "He shoved me, said I was disrespecting his wife. I didn't want to cause more distress." "So you don't actually know what killed her?" The doctor looked at his hands. "No, I don't." Next, Preston interviewed the neighbors. Mrs. Anderson. "I heard them fighting all the time. Crashes, screams. Once I saw her with a black eye. She said she walked into a door." Mr. Jones. "She bought powder to cover bruises. Lots of it. More than any woman needs for her complexion." The Reverend's wife. "She stopped coming to prayer meetings after she married. When I asked why, she said her husband didn't like her going out without him." Then Preston discovered something interesting. Erasmus Shue had been married twice before. His first wife, Allie Esteline Cutlip, had divorced him in 1889, claiming extreme cruelty. She told anyone who would listen that he'd beaten her, threatened her with knives, and once tried to strangle her. She'd fled back to her family in Pocahontas County. His second wife, Lucy Ann Tritt, had died in 1893. Officially, she died of a fever. But Preston tracked down her neighbors in Droop Mountain. "We always wondered about that death," an elderly woman told him. "She was healthy as a horse one day, dead the next. And at the funeral, she had marks on her neck, bruises. Her family wanted an investigation, but Erasmus left town the day after the burial. Disappeared completely. Until he showed up in Greenbrier County. Found another young, trusting woman. Married her quickly. And now she was dead too. Preston had enough." On February 22, 1897, almost a month after Zona's death, Prosecutor Preston obtained a court order to exhume her body. Erasmus Shue was furious. "This is desecration," he shouted when the sheriff served him notice. "My wife is at peace. That crazy old woman is doing this. She never liked me. She's trying to destroy me. but he couldn't stop it. On a cold, foggy morning, a group of men gathered at the Soul Chapel Cemetery. The ground was still frozen. It took hours to dig down to the coffin. They lifted it carefully, carried it to a shed that had been prepared for the examination. 3 doctors were present: Dr. Knapp, Dr. Rupert, and Dr. McClung. The sheriff was there. Preston was there. Erasmus Shue was there too, pacing outside, muttering about injustice and persecution. When they opened the coffin, the smell of roses filled the air. Nobody could explain it. Zona had been dead for a month. There should have been other smells, but there was only roses. They removed the scarf. The 3 doctors conducted a thorough examination that lasted 4 hours. What they found was damning. Zona's neck was dislocated between the first and second vertebrae. The ligaments were torn. The windpipe was crushed. Finger-shaped bruises covered her throat, perfectly matching the grip of 2 hands. She had been strangled. Her neck had been broken. She had been murdered. Dr. Rupert, the senior physician, was clear in his report. The victim died from violence inflicted upon her person by human hands. The injuries are consistent with manual strangulation, followed by a deliberate breaking of the neck. There were other injuries too: bruised ribs, some cracked, bruises on her back, and arms, signs of repeated abuse over time. Dr. Knapp, looking at the evidence, felt sick. "I should have insisted on examining her properly. I failed her." When they told Erasmus the findings, he laughed. "Prove I did it," he said. "You can't prove anything." He was arrested on the spot. The sheriff, J.P. Dennis, arrested Erasmus Shue at his home on March 1, 1897. Shue didn't resist. He seemed almost amused. "This is all that crazy old woman's doing," he told the sheriff as they put him in handcuffs. "She's turned everyone against me with her lies." "What lies would those be?" the sheriff asked. "She claims Zona's ghost talked to her." "Ghost? Can you believe it? And you're arresting me based on the word of a ghost?" The sheriff said nothing, but he noticed something interesting. Erasmus Shue was wearing a scarf, a bright red scarf, just like the one he'd wrapped around his dead wife's neck. As they led him to the jail in Lewisburg, people came out of their houses to watch. Word had spread quickly. The blacksmith who'd killed his wife, the man who thought he'd gotten away with murder. Someone threw a rock. It missed Shue, but hit the wagon. "Murderer!" a woman shouted. Shue just smiled, that cold, empty smile that never reached his eyes. While awaiting trial in the Greenbrier County jail, Erasmus Shue couldn't keep his mouth shut. He told his cellmate, a man named Coffee, that he'd been married 3 times and planned to marry 7 times total. "7's a lucky number," he said. "I've had 3, 4 more to go." When Coffee asked what happened to his wives, Shue laughed. "They didn't work out." He spent his time reading the Bible, but only specific passages. The ones about women being subservient to their husbands, about wives obeying without question. He'd read them aloud, over and over. He also made strange comments to the guards. "They can't prove anything without a witness," he'd say. And there were no witnesses, just me and Zona. And Zona can't talk. Then he'd laugh, a sound that made even the hardened guards uncomfortable. One guard, Thomas Hughes, later testified that Shue once said, "They'll never convict me. No jury would convict a man on the word of a ghost. It's insane." But Erasmus Shue had underestimated 2 things: the persistence of a grieving mother and the power of truth, no matter how strangely it comes to light. The trial of Erasmus Shue was scheduled for June 1897. It would be the most sensational trial in West Virginia history. The prosecution, led by Preston, had a strong case: medical evidence of strangulation, a history of domestic violence, suspicious behavior after the death. 2 previous wives, one fled, one dead, under mysterious circumstances. But they also had a problem. All of this was circumstantial. There were no eyewitnesses to the murder. No one had seen Erasmus kill Zona, except, according to Mary Jane Heaster, Zona herself. Preston had to make a decision. Should he put Mary Jane on the stand? If she testified about the ghost, it might make the whole prosecution look foolish. But if she didn't testify, they'd lose their most passionate witness, the person who'd pushed for the investigation in the first place. The defense attorney, William Rucker, was confident. "They have nothing," he told Shue. "Some bruises that could have come from falling down the stairs, a bitter mother-in-law who never liked you, and a ghost story. We'll destroy them." But Rucker made a critical mistake. He assumed the jury would laugh at the ghost story. He was wrong. June 23, 1897, the Greenbrier County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed. People had traveled from all over the state to witness the ghost trial. Newspapers from Charleston, Richmond, even New York had sent reporters. Outside, vendors sold lemonade and sandwiches to the crowds who couldn't get seats inside. It was like a carnival, but with death at its center. Erasmus Shue entered the courtroom in a new black suit, his hair slicked back, that red scarf around his neck. He smiled at the crowd, waved to some of the pretty women, acted like he was the star of a show. The jury was 12 men, all local. Farmers, shopkeepers, laborers, men who knew the value of hard work and the sanctity of marriage. Men who went to church on Sundays and believed in heaven and hell. And, as it turned out, men who weren't entirely closed to the idea that sometimes the dead might have something to say. Prosecutor Preston opened with the facts. "Gentlemen of the jury, we will prove that Erasmus Shue strangled his wife, Zona Heaster Shue, on January 22, 1897. We will show you medical evidence. We will present witnesses to his violent nature, and we will demonstrate a pattern of abuse that ended in murder." Defense attorney Rucker stood. "Gentlemen, my client is innocent. His only crime is marrying into a family that never accepted him. A bitter mother-in-law has concocted a fantasy, a ghost story, to frame an innocent man for an accidental death. Don't let superstition override justice." The prosecution presented their case methodically. First, the doctors testified about the autopsy findings: the crushed windpipe, the dislocated vertebrae, the finger-shaped bruises. Dr. Rupert was particularly damning. "In my 30 years of medicine, I have never seen such clear evidence of manual strangulation. Someone squeezed the life out of this young woman, then broke her neck to be sure she was dead." Next came the neighbors. One by one, they testified about the fights they'd heard, the bruises they'd seen, Zona's fear in the weeks before her death. Mrs. Anderson broke down crying as she testified. "I should have done something. I heard her crying through the walls. I heard him hitting her, but it wasn't my business. God forgive me. I said it wasn't my business." Then came testimony about Shue's past. A letter from his first wife was read into evidence. "He is a violent man who takes pleasure in causing pain. I feared for my life every day I was married to him. I fled because I knew if I stayed, he would eventually kill me." The circumstantial evidence about his second wife's death was presented. The similarities to Zona's death, the bruises on the neck, the sudden departure after the funeral. By the end of the prosecution's case, things looked bad for Erasmus Shue, but the defense hadn't presented their case yet, and more importantly, Mary Jane Heaster hadn't testified. Everyone was waiting for the ghost. William Rucker was a smart lawyer. His strategy was simple: make the prosecution look like superstitious fools. He called witnesses who testified that Erasmus was a good worker, a church-going man, a grieving widower. The blacksmith shop owner never had a problem with him, showed up on time, did his work, minded his own business. The Reverend. He attended services regularly, seemed devoted to his wife. I saw them together often, and they appeared happy. Then Rucker made his big move. "I call Mary Jane Heaster to the stand." The courtroom went silent. Preston objected. "Mrs. Heaster is our witness, not theirs." "She's the one who started this whole investigation," Rucker said. "I have the right to question her about her motivations." The judge allowed it. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. "Are you still listening?" "Good, because what happens next is the most important part of our story. This is the testimony that made legal history. Every word I'm about to tell you was recorded in the official court transcripts." Mary Jane Heaster walked to the witness stand with her head high. She wore her best black dress. Her gray hair was pulled back severely. She looked like what she was, a grieving mother who'd lost everything. Rucker approached her with a condescending smile. "Mrs. Heaster, is it true you never approved of your daughter's marriage to my client?" "I did not." "You tried to prevent the marriage?" "I warned my daughter I felt something was wrong with him." "So you had a prejudice against Mr. Shue from the beginning?" "I had a feeling, a mother's instinct." "A feeling?" Rucker smiled at the jury. "And after your daughter's unfortunate death, you claim her ghost visited you?" The courtroom held its breath. Mary Jane looked Rucker straight in the eye. "She did. Can you tell the court about this visitation?" This was it. This was where Rucker expected her to sound crazy, to talk about floating lights and mysterious voices and all the things that would make the jury dismiss her as a hysteric old woman. But Mary Jane was smarter than that. Mary Jane spoke clearly, calmly, without embellishment. "My daughter appeared to me 4 nights after I'd prayed for the truth to be revealed. She told me her husband had strangled her because she hadn't cooked meat for his dinner. She showed me the Alpine bruises on her neck. She turned her head completely around to show me it had been broken." "And you expect this jury to believe—" "I expect this jury to look at the evidence," Mary Jane interrupted. "My daughter told me to make them examine her neck. I did. And what did they find? Exactly what she said they would. Strangulation, a broken neck." Rucker tried to make her sound insane, but with every question, Mary Jane remained calm, consistent, credible. "How do you know it wasn't a dream?" "I know my dreams from my waking. I was awake." "How could a ghost speak?" "I don't know how. I only know what happened." "Why would a ghost come to you instead of, I don't know, the sheriff?" "Because I'm her mother. Because I prayed for justice. Because she knew I would fight for her when no one else would." Then Mary Jane said something that changed everything. "You can believe me or not about the ghost, but you can't deny the bruises I saw at the funeral. You can't deny the broken neck the doctors found. You can't deny that Erasmus Shue wouldn't let anyone examine my daughter's body. The ghost just told me what I already knew in my heart. That man murdered my child." When she stepped down from the stand, several members of the jury were wiping their eyes. Against his lawyer's advice, Erasmus Shue insisted on testifying in his own defense. It was a disaster. He was arrogant, dismissive. He laughed at inappropriate times. He called Mary Jane a crazy old bat and said Zona was clumsy and probably fell down the stairs. When asked about his previous wives, he became evasive. "I've been unlucky in love," he said with that cold smile. "Some men are." Preston cross-examined him brilliantly. "Mr. Shue, why did you prevent Dr. Knapp from examining your wife's neck?" "I was grieving." "Why did you dress her yourself?" "I wanted her to look nice." "Why the scarf?" "It was her favorite." "She didn't own a red scarf, we've checked. You bought that scarf the day after she died." Shue's smile faltered. "Why did your first wife leave you?" "Objection!" Rucker shouted. "It goes to pattern of behavior," Preston argued. The judge allowed it. "She was difficult," Shue said. "She says you beat her, tried to strangle her. Women say things when they're emotional. Your second wife died with bruises on her neck." I wouldn't know. I wasn't there. You left town the day after her funeral. I had business elsewhere. Just like you were planning to leave Greenbrier County before you were arrested? Shue's face turned red. That's a lie. We have witnesses who saw you trying to sell your belongings, who heard you say you were heading west. By the time Shue left the stand, his composure was completely shattered. The mask had slipped. The jury had seen the real man underneath. Angry, violent, dangerous. Prosecutor Preston's closing argument was masterful. Gentlemen of the jury, you've heard medical evidence that Zona Shue was strangled. You've heard testimony about a pattern of violence. You've heard about 2 previous wives, one who fled in fear, one who died under suspicious circumstances. Yes, you've also heard about a ghost, and maybe you believe in ghosts, maybe you don't. But here's what matters. Mary Jane Heaster believed her daughter was murdered before any ghost appeared. She saw the bruises. She knew something was wrong. Whether a ghost told her or her own intuition told her, she was right. Erasmus Shue thought he could kill his wife and get away with it. He thought no one would question a husband's grief. He thought no one would look too closely. He was wrong. Don't let him get away with murder. Give Zona Shue the justice she deserves. Defense attorney Rucker tried to salvage the case. Gentlemen, you cannot convict a man based on a ghost story. This is 1897, not the Dark Ages. We deal in facts, not superstition. A woman fell down the stairs. Her neck broke. It's tragic, but it's not murder. Don't let a bitter mother-in-law's fantasies send an innocent man to the gallows. But the damage was done. The jury retired to deliberate on June 30th, 1897. The whole town waited. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse. Bets were placed. Arguments broke out between those who believed in the ghost and those who didn't. Inside the jury room, the 12 men struggled with an unprecedented situation. Can we really convict based on a ghost? One asked. We're not, another replied. We're convicting based on the medical evidence. The ghost just pointed us to look for it. But if we convict, everyone will say we believed in the ghost. So what? If the ghost was right about the murder, who cares? They deliberated for just 1 hour and 10 minutes. When they filed back into the courtroom, Erasmus Shue was smiling. Surely, he thought, no jury would convict on such strange evidence. The foreman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Erasmus Stribling Trout Shue, guilty of murder in the first degree. The courtroom erupted. Mary Jane Heaster collapsed in tears, tears of relief, of vindication, of grief. Erasmus Shue's smile finally disappeared. This is insanity, he shouted. You're convicting me on the word of a ghost? The judge sentenced him to life in prison. As they led him away, he turned to Mary Jane. You did this, you and your lies. Mary Jane looked him straight in the eye. No, Zona did it. She wouldn't rest until there was justice, and now she can. Erasmus Shue was taken to the West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville on July 13, 1897. The prison was a Gothic nightmare of stone and iron, known for its harsh conditions and violent inmates. Shue, used to charming his way through life, found no friends there. He was assigned to work in the prison shoe shop. The man who'd once worked as a blacksmith now spent his days stitching leather. His hands, that had strangled Zona, now making boots for other prisoners. He wrote letters proclaiming his innocence, but no one wanted to hear from him. His family disowned him. The newspapers that had once covered his trial forgot about him. He tried to appeal his conviction several times, arguing that spectral evidence should not have been admitted. Every appeal was denied. In his cell, he kept a Bible, but guards noticed he'd torn out all the pages that talked about judgment and punishment. Back in Greenbrier County, the case became legend almost immediately. Some people were troubled by the verdict. How could a court of law accept testimony about a ghost? What did this say about the justice system? Others saw it differently. The ghost hadn't been the evidence. The ghost had led them to the evidence. The broken neck, the bruises, the pattern of violence. Those were real. The ghost was just a messenger. The sole chapel where Zona was buried became a site of pilgrimage. People would leave flowers on her grave, asking for her help in solving their own mysteries, finding their own justice. Dr. Knapp never forgave himself for not examining Zona properly. He became an advocate for thorough death investigations, teaching younger doctors to never let a grieving family member prevent a proper examination. The neighbors who'd heard the fights and seen the bruises formed a sort of informal network, promising to watch out for signs of abuse, to speak up when they saw women in danger. Mary Jane Heaster lived for another 20 years after the trial. She never remarried, never left Greenbrier County. She continued to live in the same house where Zona's ghost had appeared to her. People would often ask her about the ghost. Had Zona appeared again? Did she have messages from other dead relatives? Mary Jane would always give the same answer. Zona came because there was work to be done. The work is finished. She's at rest now. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, neighbors would see Mary Jane sitting on her porch, talking softly to the empty chair beside her. And sometimes they swore they could smell roses on the wind, even in the middle of winter. When Mary Jane died in September 1916, she was buried next to Zona in the Soul Chapel Cemetery. Her tombstone read simply, Mary Jane Heaster, Mother. At her funeral, the Reverend said, "She was a woman who loved her daughter so fiercely that not even death could stop her from seeking justice. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, you have to believe in that kind of love." The case of the Greenbrier Ghost remains the only case in American legal history where ghostly testimony helped secure a murder conviction. The court records are clear. The testimony is documented. The conviction stood. Legal scholars have studied the case for over a century, debating its implications. Can supernatural testimony ever be admissible? Was this a dangerous precedent or a unique situation? Most conclude that the ghost testimony wasn't really what convicted Erasmus Shue. It was the physical evidence, the autopsy findings, the history of violence, his suspicious behavior. The ghost simply prompted the investigation that uncovered the truth. But that raises an interesting question. Does it matter how the truth comes to light as long as justice is served? Erasmus Shue died in the West Virginia State Penitentiary on March 13, 1900, just 3 years into his life sentence. The official cause of death was listed as natural causes, but prisoners who were there told a different story. They said he'd been complaining for weeks about being cold, even in the heat of the prison. He'd wake up screaming about someone choking him. He'd claw at his neck, gasping for air, even though nothing was there. The night he died, his cellmate reported that Shue suddenly sat up in bed, eyes wide with terror. "She's here," he whispered. "Zona's here." Then he grabbed his throat, made a horrible choking sound, and fell back dead. When they examined his body, they found bruises on his neck, finger-shaped bruises. But there was no one in the cell except his sleeping cellmate. The door was locked from the outside. There was no way anyone could have gotten in. The prison doctor, not wanting to deal with another supernatural incident, simply wrote "natural causes" and had the body buried in the prison cemetery. No one came to claim him. No one attended his burial. He was put in the ground in a pine box with just a number to mark his grave. Some say if you visit that prison cemetery on a cold January night, the anniversary of Zona's death, you can hear the sound of choking, of someone gasping for air that will never come. The Greenbrier Ghost case matters for more reasons than just its supernatural elements. It was one of the first cases in America where domestic violence was taken seriously by the legal system. In 1897, wife-beating was still largely considered a private matter. Men had tremendous power over their wives. Women had few legal protections. But this case said, no, Murder is murder. Abuse is abuse. And justice must be served no matter how it comes to light. It also shows the power of a mother's love and determination. Mary Jane Heaster refused to let her daughter's death go uninvestigated. She pushed, she persisted, she prayed, and she made sure the truth came out. Whether you believe she really saw Zona's ghost, or whether her subconscious mind put together the clues and created a vision to justify what she already knew, the result was the same. A killer was caught, tried, and convicted. In recent years, paranormal investigators have visited Greenbrier County, trying to make contact with Zona's spirit. They've used EVP recorders, electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras. Some claim to have captured evidence. A woman's voice saying, "Mother, cold spots in the cemetery, orbs of light near Zona's grave." Others say it's all nonsense, that the story has been embellished over the years, that Mary Jane probably just had a vivid dream and convinced herself it was real. But here's what we know for certain. Zona Shue was murdered by her husband. Her mother pushed for an investigation when everyone else was ready to forget. The investigation revealed the truth. Justice was served. Whether a ghost was involved or not, those facts remain. The story of the Greenbrier Ghost is also a warning. It reminds us that domestic violence thrives in silence, that abusers count on their victims being too afraid or ashamed to speak up, that they rely on society looking the other way. Zona couldn't speak up in life. She was trapped by the conventions of her time, by her isolation, by her fear. But her story, however it came to light, has spoken for generations of women since. It says, look closer, ask questions, don't ignore the signs. Don't let politeness or social convention prevent you from helping someone who might be in danger. It says, the truth will come out, one way or another. Today, you can visit Greenbrier County and take a tour of the sites connected to this case. The house where Zona died still stands, though it's been renovated many times. Tourists say they feel cold spots, hear footsteps on the stairs, smell roses where no roses grow. The Soul Chapel Cemetery is peaceful now. Zona's grave is marked with a historical plaque that tells her story. People leave flowers, especially roses, and sometimes letters asking for her help in finding their own justice. The courthouse where the trial took place is now a museum. You can see the actual court records, read the testimony, even sit in the courtroom where Erasmus Shue was convicted. The tour guides will tell you the facts of the case, but they'll also tell you the stories that aren't in the official records, like how every prosecutor who's worked in that courthouse since has reported feeling a presence in the building, a helpful presence that seems to guide them toward evidence in difficult cases. Or how court reporters sometimes find their typewriters or computers typing by themselves. Look closer. Or how, on very quiet mornings, you can sometimes smell roses in the courthouse halls. So what really happened in Greenbrier County in 1897? Did Zona Shue's ghost really appear to her mother? Did the dead reach across the veil to demand justice? Did a mother's love transcend death itself? Or did Mary Jane Heaster's subconscious mind piece together the clues, the bruises, the behavior, the fear in her daughter's eyes, and create a vision that gave her the courage to act on what she already suspected? Does it matter? A young woman was murdered. Her killer thought he'd gotten away with it. But whether through supernatural intervention or maternal intuition, the truth came to light. Justice was served. And perhaps that's the real ghost story here. Hide. Not that the dead can speak, but that love and determination can make the impossible possible. That a mother's refusal to give up can change the course of justice. That sometimes the universe itself seems to bend toward truth. We're at the end now, but before you go, I want you to understand why this story has survived for over 125 years. It's not just because it's spooky. It's not just because it involves a ghost. It's because it speaks to something fundamental in all of us. the need for justice, the power of love, and the belief that truth will find a way. Every time this story is told, Zona Shue lives again. Every time someone visits her grave, she's remembered not as a victim, but as a woman whose death exposed a killer and possibly saved other women from the same fate. Every time a mother reads about Mary Jane Heaster and finds the courage to fight for her own child, the ghost walks again. Every time someone sees the warning signs of abuse and speaks up instead of staying silent, Zona's death has meaning. After all these years, questions remain. Was Erasmus Shue a serial killer who would have continued murdering wives if he hadn't been caught? How many other women in 1897 died like Zona, but didn't have a mother like Mary Jane to fight for them? What really happened in that prison cell the night Erasmus died? And the biggest question of all, in a world where we demand proof, evidence, facts, is there room for mysteries that can't be explained? For justice that comes from unexpected places? For truth that transcends our understanding? Now I have something important to ask you. This story only lives if people remember it, if they tell it, if they learn from it. So here's what I need you to do. Share this story. Tell someone about the Greenbrier Ghost, not just as a spooky tale, but as a reminder that abuse thrives in silence, that justice sometimes needs champions, and that every victim deserves someone who won't give up on them. If you know someone who might be in danger, don't look away. Don't assume it's none of your business. Be the neighbor who speaks up. Be the friend who asks the hard questions. Be the person who believes. And remember, truth has a way of coming to light, even from the darkest places, even from beyond the grave. Some say if you stand at Zona's grave on a quiet evening and listen carefully, you can hear her whisper on the wind. Not words of sorrow or revenge, but a simple message. Don't let them get away with it. The Greenbrier Ghost case remains unique in American legal history. No other murder conviction has ever been secured with the help of ghostly testimony entered into the official record. But perhaps that's not the most remarkable thing about this case. The most remarkable thing is that in 1897, in rural West Virginia, in a time when women had few rights and fewer protections, a mother's love and determination brought a killer to justice. Whether she did it with the help of a ghost or the power of her own intuition, Mary Jane Heaster proved that some bonds can't be broken by death. Some truths can't be buried. Some mothers will never stop fighting for their children. And some stories, the important ones, the ones that matter, never really end. They just wait for the next person to tell them, to remember them, to learn from them. So remember Zona Heaster Shue. Remember her mother, Mary Jane. Remember that justice can come from the most unexpected places. And remember, always remember, that the truth will find a way, even if it has to come back from the dead to do it. Thank you for listening to this true story from American history. If it moved you, disturbed you, or made you think, then Zona's story lives on. Share it. Remember it. And never forget that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that really happened. The Greenbrier Ghost still watches over West Virginia, they say. Still ensures that the truth comes to light. Still whispers on the wind to those who need to hear. Justice will find a way. The Greenbrier Ghost case has influenced American culture in ways that still ripple through our society today. Writers have drawn inspiration from it for over a century. It's been the subject of novels, plays, opera, and countless articles. Each retelling adds another layer to the legend, but the core truth remains. A woman was murdered, and her killer was brought to justice in the most unusual way possible. In the legal community, the case is still studied and debated. Law schools use it as an example of how evidence works, how juries think, and how sometimes the pursuit of justice takes unexpected turns. Some professors use it to teach about the evolution of domestic violence laws. Others use it to discuss the role of community pressure in criminal investigations. The case also marked a turning point in how death investigations were conducted. After the embarrassment of Dr. Knapp's insufficient initial examination, West Virginia and other states began implementing more rigorous standards for death investigations. Coroners were given more authority to override family objections. The case literally changed how we investigate suspicious deaths in America. Every year, paranormal investigators flock to Greenbrier County. They bring their equipment, their theories, their hope of making contact with Zona or capturing evidence of the supernatural. Some of the most intriguing findings. In 2018, a team recorded what they claim is a woman's voice in the courthouse saying, "Truth will out," a phrase that appears nowhere in the trial transcripts but was common in Shakespeare, which educated women like Zona might have known. Multiple photographers have captured unexplained mists and orbs around Zona's grave, particularly on January 23rd, the anniversary of her death. Temperature readings at the site where the Shue house stood consistently show cold spots that can't be explained by air currents or underground water. Skeptics dismiss all of this as suggestion and coincidence, but even they can't explain why so many people independently report the same phenomena: the smell of roses, the feeling of being watched, the sensation of sadness mixed with determination. What makes the Greenbrier Ghost story especially relevant today is how familiar it feels despite being over 125 years old. A charming man with a dark past moves to a new place where nobody knows his history. He targets a vulnerable woman. He isolates her from her support system. He escalates from emotional to physical abuse. He kills her when she doesn't comply with his demands. This pattern plays out thousands of times each year in America. The only difference is that today we have names for it: domestic violence, intimate partner homicide, coercive control. But we still struggle with the same problems they faced in 1897. Victims are often not believed. Police sometimes dismiss domestic violence as a family matter. Abusers are master manipulators who present a charming face to the world, and by the time anyone takes it seriously, it's often too late. The Greenbrier Ghost case reminds us that these problems aren't new, but it also reminds us that justice is possible, even when it seems impossible. While no court since has admitted ghostly testimony, the Greenbrier case did establish important precedents. It reinforced that suspicious deaths require thorough investigation, regardless of family wishes. It demonstrated that circumstantial evidence, when overwhelming, can secure a conviction. It showed that community testimony about abuse patterns is relevant and admissible. Most importantly, it established that domestic violence is a serious crime, worthy of the justice system's full attention. Modern prosecutors still reference the case not for its supernatural elements, but for its demonstration of how to build a case on circumstantial evidence and community testimony. In 2003, descendants of both Zona Heaster and Erasmus Shue met for the first time at a historical society event in Greenbrier County. Zona's great-great-niece, Margaret, now in her 80s, shared family stories passed down through generations. She said Mary Jane never doubted that she'd seen her daughter's ghost. Grandmother said Aunt Mary Jane was the most level-headed woman she knew. If she said she saw Zona, she saw Zona. Surprisingly, one of Erasmus Shue's distant relatives attended too. He asked to remain anonymous but said, "Our family doesn't talk about Erasmus. He's the black sheep we've tried to forget. But maybe forgetting is wrong. Maybe we need to remember the evil people are capable of so we can prevent it." The two families stood together at Zona's grave, a moment of reconciliation over a century in the making. If this story has moved you, here are concrete actions you can take. Learn the warning signs of domestic abuse, isolation from friends and family, controlling behavior, jealousy, verbal degradation, physical violence. If you see these signs, speak up. Support local domestic violence organizations. They provide shelter, legal aid, and counseling to victims. Your donation or volunteer time could save a life. Believe survivors. When someone tells you they're being abused, believe them. Don't ask why they don't just leave. There are many reasons victims stay. Instead, ask how you can help. Push for justice. Support legislation that protects victims and holds abusers accountable. Vote for prosecutors and judges who take domestic violence seriously. Tell this story. Share the tale of the Greenbrier Ghost, not just as entertainment, but as education, as warning, as proof that justice can prevail. Every major element of this story is based on historical fact. The trial transcripts, newspaper accounts, and county records all exist and can be examined. The Greenbrier Ghost case remains the only instance in United States legal history where testimony about a ghost helped secure a murder conviction. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the fact remains. Erasmus Shue murdered his wife, and against all odds, he was brought to justice in an era when such crimes often went unpunished. The real ghost in this story isn't Zona. It's the specter of domestic violence that still haunts our society today. Visit Greenbrier County, West Virginia, to see the historical sites for yourself. Stand at Zona's grave. Walk through the courthouse. Feel the weight of history and the presence of a story that refuses to be forgotten. The truth, as they say, is stranger than fiction. And sometimes, just sometimes, it speaks from beyond the grave. Remember Zona Heaster Shue. Remember all the Zonas whose stories were never told. And remember that justice, however it comes, is always worth fighting for.